Prince Valiant is no longer a boy, but he still is not a man. He's had his first taste of love, which ended in heartbreak, and now he returns to Camelot. Will he become a knight? When the Saxons invade, how will Val react? And what will happen when the young man encounters a perfect kingdom with a death wish? Today on Truth, Beauty, Comics.
Welcome to Truth, Beauty, Comics. I'm Levi, a cartoonist.
And I'm Felix, a guy who likes comics.
And this is the podcast where we look for transcendence in a pulpy medium. And today we'll be talking about the tail end of the first collection of the Prince Valiant volume by Fantagraphics in the years 1938, and then the first half, roughly, of the second volume, the years 1938 through 1939.
Yeah, we'll see how far we get.
Yeah, exactly, as is always the case with these here. And we left off on kind of a tragic note, I think, last time, and with the death of Eileen, kind of Val's doomed first love. But where do we pick up things this time, Felix? It seems like they don't linger too long on the tragedy.
Yeah, they confront it fairly directly, as we sort of discussed at the end of last episode, and it's more poignantly done, as we talked about, than I sort of would have expected, I think. But pretty quickly they come back to Camelot, and Val is overjoyed to see Sir Gawain and begs King Arthur to be knighted. King says that he's too young, so Val decides to prove himself by entering this jousting tournament anonymously, wearing all white with his face covered. And he doesn't win, but he performs brilliantly, ends up losing to Sir Tristram that he loses to.
Yeah.
Tristram. And he's just crestfallen and ends up leaving Camelot. Meanwhile, King Arthur changes his mind and sort of says, okay, after seeing how well he did in this tournament, I think he actually could be a knight of the Round Table, but Val is already.
This little bit is interesting to me, just because one of the things reading Le Morte to Arthur is there's almost an annoying amount of time paid to jousting. I mean, it's like really important. So this seemed like, the fact that Val acquits himself really well in jousting is kind of a big deal, at least in the medieval world, it seems like, or the late Middle Ages.
Jousting to me is much more exciting in a comic than in Le Morte d'Arthur, because it's a little bit. Right. I mean, just the prose is pretty dry. I haven't read the whole of Le Morte d'Arthur because it's thousands of odd pages, but it's relatively dry prose, and so the kind of exciting bits, it's very fun to imagine, but it's not necessarily really pulling you along in the same way. Whereas the kind of action panels in the tournament, and it's pretty short. It's just a few weeks. Here's the date, October 16th, the one sort of action panel of Val knocking the other rider off. I mean, it's just, there's this great sense of motion. It's that thing that Foster does so well, where it's half an action comic, half a painting.
Yeah. You're right. 'Cause it is something that's using like motion lines and stuff you would not see in a painting. So it is kind of like that, bridging that fine line there of giving you more than what a static illustration can do, but still holding on to a lot of those really elegant qualities to it. Yeah, this is a fun little sequence, I think.
Yeah. And then so Val leaves Camelot and ends up returning home for the first time in 2 years. There, he's very excited to see his father and his old friends and everything. But it says November 6th, but after the clash of battles and the high adventures of King Arthur's court, this is but child's play. While winter winds howl mournfully around the house, Val lays great plans for the future. So he comes home, but what's the T.S. Eliot line in Four Quartets? Coming home again and knowing it for the first time.
Yeah.
Or there's just the you can't go home again.
Right.
Thomas Wolfe, I think. And he is. I think, kind of restless there in a way that he wasn't as a boy. Because as a boy, he was
Hmm.
being challenged, sort of one thing after another in the fens, but
Yeah.
he sort of mastered the fens and grown past them.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
Yeah. He
he
even finds a
yeah,
skeleton of the beast he fought, maybe,
yeah, that's
if
how
I'm
I took
understanding
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is kind of like there's not much left for him here. He's moved on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, and the one thing that he still, well, there's two things, right? So that he still needs. One is the only sort of prophet that he's met that seems legitimate is Horrit the Witch, and he wants to understand this great sword that he's come upon, the singing sword. And then he also, I think, only at this time really believes that his father and his people can retake their homeland of Thule. And so those are sort of his two missions while he's there. When he shows the sword to Horrit, she's sort of almost disgusted by it because it only works for you if you fight in just cause. But if you're doing things that are wrong, the sword will not work properly for you. And so she's kind of disgusted by it. And that's fine for Val. But Hornet also sort of does a bit more prophesying, which is not shared with the reader. And Val is white and trembling when he leaves and runs off. He's so frightened that he's sort of
Hmm.
rushing home, breaks through the ice, and gets extremely ill. And so when he's home, he falls almost into a coma. And there's this striking kind of dream sequence. This might be a good time to sort of pause. What did you think about this kind of homecoming sequence? I guess there's a little bit more to come, but what did you think of this
Yeah.
after having had, a year and a half of images of knights and Camelot and things coming back to the fens?
Right. One of the things I think is interesting to me is if you, because we're still in the same volume and we're now at the very end of volume one, but if you just kind of flip back and forth between, because we're back at the setting that we were at the beginning of this volume, so it's a good place to kind of to take a look and just look at the artwork at the beginning of how he drew it, these sequences, and where we are now. It's really not at anything I would ever call bad. It's very good at the beginning, but there's something he's made the panels bigger, so he's given himself more space to kind of do these pictures, over a year later now. And I just think they're better. Never would call them bad to begin with, but he's clearly gotten better as an artist, even with, the coloring choices. It's more dramatic this time with Horrit, even though we don't,
Absolutely.
there's he's kind of choosing the details a little bit more, the characters, the way he puts it together. I feel like it's just showing that it's one of those things. Like, to me, I found this with any kind of skill that you try to master, like playing an instrument or something. There's like a certain level that you reach really fast, right? If you dedicate yourself really hard. But then, like, all the progress beyond that is so slow. So it
Yeah.
takes, but you see that here, that I think by drawing at this output that he's doing, he's improving, even though he was very good when he started. That his storytelling visually has gotten much better, and also by giving himself more space, I actually like reading it more than you do at the beginning.
Yeah, it's
This
much more
sequence.
pleasant to read, and my eyes just kind of glide across the page. Um,
Right.
in a way that early on I don't want to say it's a chore. It was always exciting, it was always fun, but it's just effortless now. Yeah, already
Yeah.
just 2 years in, and he keeps going for a few
And they're
decades.
very similar sequences here, right? Like, there's one where they kind of flash forward, like he's having this dream. And I think he's having a fever and kind of, dreaming of all the stuff that's happened to him. And then if you go back to, oh gosh, 1937, April 17th, there's a similar kind of thing happening when she's giving a prophecy. And it's just not as impactful as what you have here on November 27th, 1938, kind of the page we have of this kind of almost montage of what's going on in his dreams. Yeah, I think Foster's really grown as an artist subtly, and his pages are much more pleasant to look at. And So it is if you take all of the stories of Prince Valiant, that we've read so far up to this point, kind of the first year or so, it's interesting to see where his character has grown. He was a young boy, starting off in this location, now coming back. Um, he's kind of a man, not to his full potential yet, but really
He's a
he's
teenager. He's tall. He's strong.
yeah,
He's get strong.
right,
Um,
yeah, and they're ready to like retake their kingdom. I think is
yeah, and it's
when they
by
left.
Val's
Yeah,
insistence that he convinces his
right,
father, like, you are able to do this. But
right.
before he can, we can sort of follow up that plot line. Um, Another quite exciting thing here is the Saxon invasion of England. Do you want to tackle that?
Sure. Yeah. So they want to they've kind of decided to retake their kingdom, but before they can, they come across basically a Saxon fleet getting ready to, and we're going to move now. I think the story roughly moves to the next volume, but they before they can begin their quest, they get wind of a Saxon invasion of England, and so Val races to Camelot to warn King Arthur. And there's a bit of like kind of comic misadventure where he meets a knight and duels him on the way, but the knight's wife is angry. He's kind of a a harassed husband to some degree. Doesn't seem like he has a very happy marriage. So there's some comedy that happens on the way, but in the end, he makes it to Camelot to warn King Arthur, where they put together a plan to greet the greater numbers of the Saxons. And that's kind of, I think, the key thing that they're facing is that the Saxons really, the force that they're coming to England with far outnumbers King Arthur's force, at least the knights that he has available to immediately respond to them. So they're pretty outnumbered. So they have to kind of use their wits to respond to this invasion by the Saxons.
I
I
enjoyed the
think
kind of tactical stuff in this section.
I did too.
I thought it was
Yeah.
well done. It was easy enough to follow.
Right.
Because oftentimes sort of in textbooks, my eyes often kind of, or not textbooks, but history books, my eyes will kind of glaze over once it starts talking about military formations. But it was kind of straightforward enough. And then January 15th, 39, he actually drew a map, really a fairly
Mm.
simple, but a map that sort of showed, okay, here's how the decoys are going to be, here's where the dummy defenders are going to be, here's where the real army is going to be, and here are the fleets. And it immediately understood, okay, here's how it's going. And but it's interesting to me that in order to do this, he kind of switched from his usual, I'll say, painterly realistic style
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to a kind of document, right? To a map
Yeah.
to communicate that. And I think communicate it really effectively. And I think that's the first time I've seen anything like that, if I'm not forgetting
I think you're
something.
right. Yeah.
Um,
I think this is
yeah, but I
also,
really,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I really liked this sequence, thought it was really exciting throughout. And it's still
Mm-hmm.
very pacey. He does a lot. Yeah, I think there's a real sort of economy of space in this physically, with the sort of outline of panels, but then also week to week, the story really is progressing. Um,
Yeah. I was just going to comment on that. I think, I kind of gave Foster flack for Val being kind of an uninteresting character. But I will say, I think that kind of changes over the course of this book. And one of the things that is consistent about Val is he does like to use his wits as much as like to get out of scrapes, as
yeah,
much as just, raw strength. Because this is something he's displayed, I feel like, many times before, where um, he's going to respond to a situation by being kind of clever, as opposed to just, kind of punching his way through it.
yeah, I think there's a bit of David and Goliath sort of consistently, at least in these early years of Valiant,
Mm-hmm.
where he is young, uh, and I mean, he has his faults, but he's basically good, and thoughtful, and not generally trying not to just go off of instinct, right? There are times when he makes mistakes, but he is kind of reflective, and and I think that's a sort of key to the kind of moral dimension of Valiant that we talked about a bit in the first episode on Foster's work. Because I do sort of come away with this thinking like there are times in our lives when we feel completely overwhelmed by whatever it is that opposes us. The job market or uh, people on another side of an issue or, the homeowners association or whatever.
Right, right.
But there is this kind of message that like continue working for the good and think seriously about your responses to things. Don't just go immediately off of instinct.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do think there's also, well, to kind of continue on here, I think the Saxons are really painted as a they're not really sympathetic, and I think we always think of like Vikings as they're a good bad guy, right? They I don't know, it's not often they get a sympathetic portrayal. Sometimes they do, I guess, but here they're clearly like kind of the forces of evil, and Arthur is the forces of the good in this. Even the way that I think that their color schemes fall out. Arthur has this kind of bright yellow, kind of golden colors associated with him. His knights. Then the Saxons are these kind of bare chested and brown bearded, Vikings that look really scary. And I think even they might be, there one Saxon who gets a name is Horsa, which is apparently a real potentially Saxon character from the 5th century. I don't know. I don't know if this is who Hal Foster's referring to or not. Probably, I would guess. But there was a Horsa Saxon invader in the 5th century who invaded England. So it would kind of make sense. But I really do think the whole sequence of the battle, which takes up 2 Sunday pages, is really striking. And especially the use of kind of reds and just the colors here. It's a really incredible just sequence to look at. I just think both of these pages are really, particularly just like the coloring on them and just the detail and just how clear the action is just really visually kind of stunning battle between
and the use of smoke and flame here.
Yeah.
So I mean the big kind of plot thing is at the end of it, Val gets knighted. But
right.
As he's being knighted, you have all the knights, warriors raising their swords in the air, and you can see Val, I think, has a tear.
Mm-hmm.
And behind them, there's still smoke. There's so much smoke. It's starting to clear, but it's still there. I don't know why. I just find that image really affecting and effective.
Yeah. Yeah, and even the one above it where, the army is kind of defeated and, Arthur's on the hilltop in silhouette, and then you have this kind of red, I don't know if it's a sunset, behind them. It's just really, really, really good. And yeah, that picture you did call out with Val being knighted, it looks like something by Howard Pyle almost. There's like every figure is doing something. There's just so much thought that's gone into this. It's really, these 2 pages just really stood out to me as very impressive.
Yeah, they're really memorable. So now on to the sort of retaking of Thule. Val's homeland is in bad shape. Everybody's overtaxed, and the usurper Slygon has been ruling them quite poorly. But he actually seems to be as miserable as his subjects. So when Val meets Slygon to discuss terms, Slygon says, quote, "The kingdom of Thule I took by force. By force I have held it. But I weary of force, of cruelty, treachery, and distrust. About me are fawning courtiers with flattering words on their tongues and hatred in their eyes, and I fear these silken jackals." What a great phrase. "Go to your father and say Slygon is but a tired huckster at heart, and will barter the kingdom of Thule for his peace island in the English swamps." So Val's father pretty bloodlessly is restored to his rightful kingdom, and is welcomed with cheers by his people. After a bit of romantic hijinks with Slygon's daughter Clarice, which I really enjoyed, Val is sort of chafing and eventually convinces his father to let him become a knight errant. Yeah, so it's not very long, but I really like this segment. I'm
Mm.
not entirely sure why, right? Because it's funny because we just come off this very exciting, relatively short, but very exciting plot line with the Saxon invasion, right? It's this historical. Then we were talking about how well depicted it is. And then the next one, we get into some interesting things coming up. But this one, like, I don't know why. I really like it. It just works for me.
Yeah.
I think it connects a bit with kind of the same kind of moral message that is behind something like the Singing Sword, where if you are working for justice, there is a kind of lightness, but when you have power and you're only using it for your own gain, it becomes a real albatross because you're always trying to kind of keep the power and keep the pleasure without losing it. Because you sort of need to rely on these people, but you don't trust them, as opposed to when you try to sort of build community, kingdom, whatever that aristocracy that is trustworthy and virtuous. Obviously, these
Yeah.
perfect, but there is this, and heavy the head that wears the crown, regardless. But there is, I think, I don't know. There's a kind of peace that can come, both a
Hmm.
personal peace and a political peace from a leader that is virtuous and clement and just.
Yeah, this did make me kind of this sequence. I did enjoy it too. I thought his speech was really well written actually. Um, that he gives to Val, the Sligon.
Yeah,
It's just a it's a bit of poetry that I thought was well done. And it did make me think of, like, what is a rightful monarch, right? It's a
yeah.
this job for Sligon, this thing he was getting by treachery, is cursed for him. Really, it seems like it, because he's not the right king, and he got it by treachery. And this gets into, kind of probably a whole kind of worldview of monarchy that's very foreign to us, kind of in the modern world. But I do think there's a little bit of a taste of that Val's father is the right king of Thule. So even if you do steal the kingdom by treachery, it's like a burden to you. It's cursed, that this rule, because you're not the right king, for this land. And maybe there's a little bit of like Macbeth in there or something. I don't know, but it was good, and it's kind of unexpected because this has been a plot in the background for a while, and to be
Yeah,
met
and
without
especially
any
because it goes,
resistance.
yeah, it just goes so quickly and easily.
Right. Yeah.
One of the few
Yeah.
problems so far that, I mean, there's been wit involved in battles, but didn't in some way come down to force.
Yeah. Yeah. As a side note, I just want to point out that this is one of the rare instances of Val wearing pants or chainmail pants. My son
Oh, I
is
hadn't
really into
noticed
medieval
that.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's really into medieval stuff, and that's his big objection to all the Prince Valiant comics is, why does Prince Valiant never wear pants? He would be you would never go into battle bare-legged. So this
You
is
know,
a rare exception.
sort of one more kind of thing. I do think our kind of, whatever you want to call it, social imaginary or whatever,
Hmm.
the way that we think about, conceptualize, imagine politics in the contemporary West. I mean, I think that there are echoes of this kind of high view of monarchy and rightful rulers and things. But it is very different. But I think that I think that those kind of echoes of it are important and worth holding on to. These senses of the sense of honor, and yeah, and it's sort of difficult to translate into a kind of democratic republic.
Yeah.
But I think our founders wanted to maintain those, in America at least. And you still have a certain sense of it in England because of the sort of ceremonial monarchy. And that monarchy actually does serve a deeply important political function,
Yeah.
right? That, like, Englishmen looked to the Queen, and now look to the King less so, but especially to Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Englishmen of deeply different political persuasions had the same queen and held her in very high regard. And I think that's
Yeah.
extremely good for a people.
Yeah,
And, there are,
there's something fundamentally different for a nation. A king is something very different than a politician. A monarch is something really different than a politician.
yeah, even a very politically engaged king, it's still
Right.
there's a
Yeah.
sense of power beyond like brute power. I think there's a kind of
Mm-hmm.
and part of it, right, like we do still have a sense of this in some things. For instance, like Supreme Court justices wear ridiculous robes that make no sense to wear in 2025. But it's
Right.
really important that they wear those robes, right? It's really important that the person of, you know, Samuel Alito or Amy Coney Barrett or uh, Notorious RBG, right? Like that the person is kind of subsumed
Mm-hmm.
by the clothing and therefore the role, and then
Right.
therefore the kind of highest form of the role, right? That it's this sort of constant reminder of what you ought to be like. I mean, even when my mother was going to college, senior year of college, you could at her school, you could still attend class in your formal academic robes.
Hmm.
And that's in America. This is not sort of an
Yeah.
Oxbridge thing. We basically completely lost this. At this one kind of fellowship I did, the John Jay Fellowship, we actually did at the time wear academic robes to class. And it does, I think, kind of serve as a constant reminder to hold yourself up to a certain standard and to treat other people in a certain way, right? And I think that
Yeah.
in a kind of post Nietzschean West, it can be hard for us to look at a scepter and crown as anything other than this kind of
Yeah.
mystical mumbo jumbo that fundamentally exists to protect and perpetuate power,
Right.
raw power. And I mean, obviously there are just kings, right? There's a reason we talk about tyrants, but a good king, that which surrounds him, ideally is not saying, look how great I am. It's look what a high calling I have.
Right.
And I,
It's like you embody the highest ideals of the nation, right? That your people in some way.
yeah.
You know, and that's more than a political thing.
And I think that, in recent decades, high public offices have largely lost that. And I think that's more recent than, between the Middle Ages and now. I think even just in recent decades, there's been a real shift away from that. And I don't want to sort of get too much into particular political figures, but I do think as a general move, this is a negative thing because I want like my congressman or whatever to see their work as a very high thing that demands the best of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that very often in the 20th century, we kind of thought of formality and those sorts of things as stumbling blocks to making that happen. And in
Right.
reality, I think when they're well done, they actually are much more effective than
Yeah.
than this kind of
Yeah.
pretense to to an unhealthy kind of equality that ends up sort of lowering the political down to like the lowest form of anything, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see it because I mean, it's a little bit appropriate maybe to bring up because this is a story that's taking place in largely in England, even though Thule is not in England. But I think you see it with the British monarchy, right? And even people who don't really have an interest in monarchy are impressed by the coronation, right, and what goes on there, and kind of the ceremony surrounding it and the reverence.
Yeah,
And in England, I do think they have an interesting dichotomy where their politicians, their prime ministers are kind of like the very typical kind of sleazy politician. Not picking on anyone in particular, but they don't necessarily embody the ideals of England as an ancient country. You know what I mean? With a long history, they're much more like your typical politician trying to make negotiations, get bills passed, and kind of the art of the compromise is kind of their game. And in America, I think we have head of government and head of state in one person, which is, I think, kind of fallen maybe a little bit on hard times when you lean more into the political rather than trying to embody the ideals of your nation. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
The next sort of very short arc is extraordinarily strange, and we touched on it last episode, so we probably won't
Mm-hmm.
go into it too much. But Val happily wanders the kingdom of Thule as a knight errant. During a storm, he seeks shelter in a cave and meets a witch. They dine together. Val, notably, says that his head is swimming from the wine. After the meal, the witch tells him that the cave is the trophy room of time, which no one dare enter. Val takes this as a challenge, goes into the cave, meets an ancient man on a throne surrounded by ruined palaces and treasures from all the empires of the world. Val wrestles with the old man and is unable to defeat him. As they wrestle, Val grows older and older until he too is a withered old man, which time easily defeats. Val stumbles out of the cave and returns to the witch's table. He drinks more of the wine and finds himself young again. He flees the cave, terrified. As he escapes, he exclaims, quote, "How terrible to be old and weak, and how good it is to be young and strong again. I must remember that." I have no idea what to make of this. I mean, I really like the art. I think the art
Yeah,
through
the art's
this is
great.
just really memorable, astonishing. The witch is creepy. Val is sort of at his headstrong best. The the old man is just, I mean, some of my favorite, like just a few panels of my favorite Foster art here. Yeah, but I have no real idea what to make of it and what Foster is
Yeah,
playing at here.
I think that's kind of one of the things that's funny about me is because kind of the moral of the story is it's like Val takes away is like it's better to be young and strong than old and weak. I must remember that. Like, okay,
Yeah, that doesn't
it
seem
does
like.
come across as like, well, that's not a very deep lesson.
Yeah, well, and I mean, because it seems like the lesson he's meant to take away here is tempus fugit memento mori. Time flies, remember death, be attentive to your eternal fate rather than trying to kind of gain earthly reward. But he's basically like, gosh, it's uncomfortable to be old and everything aches. It's nice being young. I can beat people. It's really,
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't know. Do we want to move on to Andelkrag?
Yeah. Yeah. If
If
someone
you
else
want to
wants
summarize.
to take a deeper interpretation of that, be our guest.
Yeah, feel free to write in if anybody has any thoughts on this, because I think it's really evocative, but I have no idea what to make of it.
Yeah. So after leaving the cave, Val gets word that Attila the Hun has sacked Rome, and the only fortress still standing of chivalry is Andelkrag, where I quote Prince Cameron of the High Head gathers all who love beauty, music, poetry, and noble deeds. Val journeys through a desolated Europe to Andelkrag to fight with them. And so it's confirmed that the Huns are indeed, basically laying waste to all of Europe. When he reaches the besieged Andelkrag, Val finds Prince Cameron, and he's everything that really his reputation's made him out to be. A brave, laughing prince who's totally undaunted by the hordes of Huns who have surrounded his fortress. And that day, they basically go out and kind of fight on the battlements, killing Huns. They go into battle singing. And then at night, they kind of just party with the beautiful ladies of the castle. They have these lavish feasts. But Val is wondering, like, well, okay, how long can these banquets last? The Huns have unlimited resources and we're besieged and the food is going to run out. And, presently that does happen. The day arrives when there's no more food or drink. And Prince Cameron takes this somewhat calmly. He says, okay, we're going to do what we have to do now that the food is gone. And they take all the fortress treasure and seal it away in a vault. And then all the ladies go inside a tower and Cameron lights the tower on fire, kind of to Val's shock and dismay. Then Cameron and Val and all the warriors of Andelkrag go out to meet the Huns in battle, and everyone dies except Val, who takes Cameron's body and throws it into the burning flames of Andelkrag. So this is a longer sequence so far, but it's not too long. We have maybe 8 pages dedicated to this. But What did you make of this sequence with Andelkrag?
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah,
It also has some great art. When he first comes upon
yeah,
Andelkrag, that image of the castle is one of my favorite images of castles in Prince Valiant. They're just with so many figures around it and flames and barbarians at the gates. Um,
yeah.
yeah, so sort of artistically, there's so much to it, but it's striking because they're, well, I mean, on, I think it's May 18th, 39, when he asked sort of, look, we're going to run out of food, said, would it not be well to conserve our supplies, Cameron? And Cameron responds, Sir Valiant, no enemy will ever alter the ways of living at Andelkrag. We will live, love, fight, and die like gentlemen. And it's striking to me because gentlemen, right? This is something Remy Bragg uh, kind of draws out. Gentleman has this very rich history and actually has a kind of very high view behind it, right? A true gentleman
Mm-hmm.
um, is a man who is genteel, but also who actually possesses the virtues.
Mm-hmm.
But gentleman can also be used just to mean like one who has high status and the kind of the appearance of gentility. And it seems to me that the genuine gentleman in this kind of a situation does actually pull himself back, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we shouldn't, I want to be careful with my words here because in a difficult time, we shouldn't say, oh, we're all poor, we're in danger. Uh, let's just forget about the higher things, right? C.S. Lewis has this excellent oration given during the Second World War called Learning in Wartime,
Hmm.
where he I'll butcher it, but he says, you Oxford students are likely asking yourself as you see some of your friends going out to fight for Europe and die, how we can possibly spend ourselves, reading ancient Greek and studying English literature and doing these things. And he says that actually the fundamentals of the situation have not changed. For the Christian, particularly, the world is deadly serious. Our
Yeah.
living on the precipice between heaven and hell, and we are called to this greatness and this profound gift of self. Um, but that's true whether or not you're in wartime. And in ways, the war helps you to see more clearly the value of these things, right? And so
Yeah.
I do want them singing on the way to the scaffold, like the martyrs of the French Revolution. But it's sort of morally troubling to me because they do ultimately commit suicide.
Yeah.
They sort of kill all the women. In fact, effectively the women commit suicide, and then the men sort of die honorably in battle. And I mean, again, I want to be careful here because it's not like I want to be, oh, I love rape.
Right.
Like obviously, like the idea of being taken by these barbarian hordes is awful. But when I sort of think of the people on the martyrs on the way to the scaffold singing on the way to the scaffold, they're suffering an evil rather than committing one, and so there is this, and I'm not sure my get so I think that Foster is sort of encouraging us to think about some of these questions here about what is the
Mm-hmm.
point of fine food and wine and song and the arts, and what is the gentleman's responsibility to it, and so I simultaneously kind of admire that about Andelkrag, that the kingdom works to maintain this sort of beauty and order to it. But at the same time, like they actually should be more careful with their resources. And
Yeah.
they
Right.
should work
Yeah.
to stay alive as long as they can. And their aim should be to figure out a way to sneak the women out of the kingdom rather than
Yep.
kill them, murder them,
Yeah.
or I guess give them assisted suicide, so to speak. Uh,
Right.
yeah. So anyway, but I really I really like this storyline. It's
Yeah, me
one of the
too.
most memorable in the early years of Valiant, but it's not a simple and a clear-cut one. It's no Viking invasion of England. It's not
Yes.
here is the evil, we defeat it and move on. This is a fundamentally a lost battle, and it's a lost battle by the time Val gets there, which is rare in what Prince Valiant I've read. It's rare that there's a fundamentally lost cause.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know, but
I
yeah,
think
what
it's
do you
one of the
think
ones
about
that stuck with me, definitely too. I think it jumped out at me for all those reasons you've mentioned, that it's it tip most, with maybe the exception of Eileen, most of the Prince Valiant stories have been kind of victory upon victory. And this one is really a tragedy, and which is and it feels like a story that could be a part of, kind of, like it could be a story almost that you read in Lamort to Arthur, or or something that could be told, because of that tragic element to it. And it does seem to be talking about, okay, asking the question, like, how do you live in the face of certain defeat, right? Do you throw out, do you sacrifice your ideals, or do you do anything? Will you do anything to survive, or will you stay true to yourself up to the end? Which is an interesting question for sure. And I agree with you. I don't really love the way that the people of Andelkrag behave, because they're almost blithely suicidal. It feels like, um, when it's like, well,
it?
time
Yeah,
to die, kind of thing. And
the
and and
stiff
so
upper lip to it.
yeah, I don't love the answer, but I do think it's a very interesting story. I might have, I don't know what the right thing would be, but it doesn't seem this kind of, well, let's all burn together in the tower, or burn all the women in the tower. If there was more effort to, to try to save them, I think that, speaking as a Christian, I think that would be hopefully a situation that no one ever faces, but historically could happen. What you would want to do up to the very end would be to preserve life as well as you can, and to take that opportunity to try to rescue the people, especially if you're the prince, right? At some point you would say, look, we got to figure out a way to get, like, the women and children out of here. And that would be, I think, the more noble response to this. Even if that would end, even if there's a slim chance, that would be, I think, even more noble response here.
Yeah, yeah,
you know, but it's still an interesting story, and I think it's one of the more interesting ones up to this point, if not the most interesting one
and it's
up to
memorable.
this point. Yeah,
I first read it. I mean, I first read the first few years of Valiant, maybe 2 years ago, and this story has really stuck with me.
yeah. And I think again, we talk a lot about the art, but in July 16th, 1939, that whole page is just wow. Like, almost every panel is just so dramatic. It's very tragic. After the battle, Val's kind of watching the Huns leave, but they all have to. The way this kind of wraps up why Val survives is Attila the Hun is dead, so they all have to go. All the Huns leave to I guess regroup, but literally everyone else is dead. All the people of Andelkrag is dead, and
Yeah.
just the coloring, the artwork here, it's very tragic, very dramatic, and so visually it really sticks with you too. The kind of conclusion of this story, worth reading for sure.
Yeah. All right. So we've reached the end of our first chunk of Valiant. I hope sometime, maybe in a few months or a year, that we'll return and do some more Valiant. But next time we'll be turning to Tintin's The Black Island.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode of Truth Beauty Comics, there are 3 things you can do to support it. The first is to just keep listening and tell your friends about the podcast.
The second is to review the podcast, giving it 5 stars on whatever you use to listen to it. The last thing you can do is to consider contributing to our Patreon with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like access to exclusive episodes, voting on topics for upcoming episodes, and even an original drawing from Levi. But most of all, you can help make this podcast sustainable. And thank you to Alina, our patron.
That's the end of the episode. You can reach us at truthbeautycomics@gmail.com or on social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and remember to take comics seriously and have fun while doing it.